character Luke. Chapter 1. He saw the first tree shudder and fall far off in the distance. Then he heard his mother call out from the kitchen window, "Luke, inside now." He had never disobeyed the order to hide. Even as a toddler, barely able to walk in the backyard's tall grass, he had somehow understood the fear in his mother's voice. But on this day, the day that they began to take the woods away, he hesitated. He took one extra breath of fresh air, scented with clover and honeysuckle, and from coming far away, pine smoke. He laid his hoe down gently and savored one last feeling of the warm soil beneath his bare feet. And he reminded himself, I will never be allowed outside again. Maybe never, as long as I live. He turned and he walked back into the house as silently as a shadow. "Why?" he asked at the supper table. Now, that wasn't a common question in the Garner house. There was plenty of hows. How much rain did the backfield get? How's the planting going? There was even what's. What did Matthew do with the 5/16 wrench? What's Dad going to do about the busted tire? But why wasn't considered much worth asking. But Luke asked again, "Why did you have to sell the woods?" Luke's father harumphed, and he paused in the middle of shoveling forkfuls of boiled potatoes into his mouth. "I told you before. We didn't have a choice. The government wanted it. You can't tell the government no." Mother came over and gave Luke's shoulder a reassuring squeeze before turning back to the stove. They had defied the government once with Luke, and that had taken all the defiance they had in them, maybe more. "He wouldn't have sold the woods if he hadn't had to," she said, ladling out some tomatoey soup. "The government didn't ask us if we wanted houses there." She pursed her lips as she slid the bowls of soup onto the table. "But the government's not going to live in the houses," Luke protested. At 12, he knew better. But sometimes he still pictured the government as a very big, mean, fat person, 2 or 3 times as tall as an ordinary man, who went around yelling at people, "Not allowed! Stop that!" It was because of the way his parents and his older brothers talked. The government wouldn't let us plant corn there again. Government keeps the prices down. Government's not going to like this crop. Probably some of the people who live in those houses will be government workers, Mother said. It'll be all city people. If he had been allowed, Luke would have gone over to the kitchen window and peered out into the woods, trying for the umpteenth time to picture rows and rows of houses where the firs and maples and the oaks now stood, or had stood. Luke knew from a sneak peek right before supper that half of the trees were now toppled. Some already lay on the ground, and some hung at weird angles from their former lofty positions in the sky. Their absence made everything look different, like a fresh haircut that was exposing a band of untanned skin on a forehead. Even from deep inside the kitchen, Luke could tell that the trees were missing because everything was brighter and more open, scarier. "And then when those people move in, I have to stay away from the windows?" Luke asked, even though he knew the answer. The question made Dad explode. He slammed his hand down on the table. "Then? You gotta stay away now! Everybody and his brother is going to be trampling through back there to see what's going on. And they see you?" He waved his fork violently. Luke wasn't sure what the gesture meant, but he knew it wasn't good. No one had ever told him exactly what would happen if anyone saw him. Death? Death was what happened to the runt pigs who got stepped on by their stepbrothers and sisters. Death was the fly that stopped buzzing when the swatter hit it. He had a hard time thinking about himself in connection with the smashed fly or the dead pig gone stiff in the sun. It made his stomach feel funny, even trying. I don't think it's fair that we've got to do Luke's chores now, Luke's older brother, Mark, grumbled. Can't he go out some, like at night? Luke waited hopefully for an answer, but Dad just said no, without even looking up. It's not fair, Mark said again. Mark was the second son, the lucky son. Luke thought that he was feeling sorry for himself. And Mark was 2 years older than Luke, and barely a year younger than Matthew, the oldest. Matthew and Mark were easily recognizable as brothers, with their dark hair and their chiseled faces. Luke was fairer and smaller boned and softer looking. He often wondered if he would ever look tough like them. Somehow, he didn't think so. Luke don't do nothing nohow, Matthew sneered. We won't miss his work at all. It's not my fault, Luke protested. I'd help more if... Mother laid her hands on his shoulders again. Hush, all of you, she said. Luke will do what he can. He always has. The sound of tires on the gravel driveway came through the open window. Now who? Dad started. Luke knew the rest of the sentence. Who could that be? Why are they bothering me now? It was his first chance to sit down all day. It was a question that Luke always heard the end of from the other side of the door. Today, skittish because the woods were coming down, he scrambled up faster than usual, dashing for the door to the back stairs. He knew without watching that his mother would take his plate from the table and hide it in the cupboard, and she would slide his chair back into the corner so that it would look like an unneeded spare. In 3 seconds, she would hide all evidence that Luke existed, just in time to step to the door and to offer a wary smile to the fertilizer salesman or the government inspector or whoever else had come to interrupt their supper. Chapter 2. There was a law against Luke. Not him personally, but everybody like him. Kids who were born after their parents had already had 2 babies. Actually, Luke didn't know if there was others like him. He wasn't supposed to exist. Maybe he was the only one. They did things to women after they had their second babies so they couldn't have any more. And if there was a mistake and a woman got pregnant anyway, she was supposed to get rid of it. That was how Mother explained it to him years ago. The first time and the only time that Luke had asked why he had to hide. He had been 6 years old. Before that, he had thought that only little kids had to stay out of sight. He had thought that as soon as he was old as Matthew and Mark, that he would get to go around like they did, riding in the back field and even into town with Dad, hanging their heads and arms out the pickup windows. And he had thought that as soon as he got as old as Matthew and Mark, that he could play in the front yard and kick the ball out into the road if he wanted. He had thought that as soon as he was old as Matthew and Mark, he could go to school. They complained about it a lot, whining, "Geez, we got to do homework." And who cares about spelling? But they also talked about games at recess and friends who shared candy at lunchtime and loaned them pocket knives to carve. Somehow Luke never got as old as Matthew and Mark. The day of his 6th birthday, Mother had baked a cake, a special one with raspberry jam dripping down the sides. And at supper that night she put 6 candles on the top and placed it in front of him and said, "Make a wish." Staring at the ring of candles, proud that his number of years finally made a ring all the way around the cake, Luke suddenly remembered another cake and another ring of 6 candles. Mark's. He remembered Mark's 6th birthday. He remembered it because even with the cake in front of him, Mark had been whining. "But I want to have a party. Robert Joe had a party on his birthday and he got to have 3 friends over." Mother said, "Shh," and she looked from Mark to Luke, saying something with her eyes that Luke didn't understand. Startled by the memory, Luke let out his breath. 2 of the candles flickered, and 1 went out. Matthew and Mark laughed. "You ain't gonna get that wish," Mark said. "Baby, you can't even blow out your candles." Luke wanted to cry. He had forgotten to make a wish, and even if he hadn't been surprised, he would have been able to blow out all 6 candles. He knew he could have. And then, would he have gotten it? No, he didn't know. A chance to ride into town in the pickup truck, or a chance to play in the front yard, or a chance to go to school. Instead, all he had was a strange memory that couldn't be right. Surely Luke was thinking about Mark's 7th birthday, or maybe his 8th. Mark couldn't have known Robert Joe when he was 6 because he would have been hiding then, like Luke. Luke thought about it for 3 days. He trailed along behind his mother as she hung washout on the line and made strawberry preserves and scrubbed the bathroom floor. Several times he started to ask, how old do I have to be before people can see me? But something always stopped him every time. Finally, on the 4th day, after Dad, Matthew, and Mark scraped back their chairs from the breakfast table and headed out to the barn, Luke crouched by the kitchen's side window, one that he wasn't supposed to look out, because people driving by might catch a glimpse of his face. He tilted his head to the side and he raised up just enough so that his left eye was level with the windowsill. He watched Matthew and Mark running in the sunlight, the tops of their hog boots thumping against their knees. They were in full sight of the world, it seemed, and they didn't care. They were racing in the front yard, out the front door of the barn, not the side one off the back, like Luke always had to, so that he would be hidden from the road. Luke turned around and he slid to the floor out of sight. Matthew and Mark never had to hide, did they? He asked. Mother was scrubbing the remains of scrambled eggs out of the skillet. She turned her head and she looked at him carefully. No, she said. Then why do I? She dried her hands and she left the sink, something that Luke had almost never seen her do before, if there was still dirty dishes left to wash. She crouched beside him and she smoothed his hair back from his forehead. Oh, Lukey, do you really need to know? Isn't it enough to know that things are just different for you? He thought about that. Mother was always saying that he was the only one who would ever get to sit on her lap and cuddle. She still read bedtime stories to him, and he knew that Matthew and Mark thought that was sissified. Was that what she meant? But he was just younger. He would grow up. Wouldn't he be like them? With an unusual stubbornness, Luke insisted, I want to know why I'm different. I want to know why I have to hide. So his mother told him. Later he wished he'd asked more questions, but at the time, it was all he could do to listen to what she told him. He felt like he was drowning in the flow of her words. It just happened, she said. You just happened, and we wanted you. And I wouldn't even let your dad talk about getting rid of you. Luke pictured himself as a baby, left in a cardboard box. The population law hadn't been around long then, and I'd always wanted lots of kids. Before, I mean, getting pregnant with you was like a miracle. I thought the government would get over its foolishness, and maybe even by the time you were born, and then I'd have a new baby to show everyone. But you didn't, Luke managed to say. You hid me. His voice sounded strangled and hoarse, like it belonged to somebody else. Mother nodded. Once I started showing, I didn't go anywhere. It wasn't hard to do. I mean, where do I go anyway? I didn't let Matthew and Mark leave the farm for fear that they would say something. I didn't even say anything to you in my letters to my mother and sister. I wasn't really scared then. I was just superstitious. I didn't want to brag. I thought I'd go to the hospital to give birth. I wasn't going to keep you a secret forever. But then